All right, yeah! Thank God for fantasy football. I'm Buster Brown, and the show is called Redemption Rehab. Today, we're talking about the weekly waiver wire report, those must-have players you need heading into the Week 5 of the NFL season, starting with this guy. How about number 17 for the Carolina Panthers, Xavier Leggett. He's a wide receiver. He's only owned in 20% of fantasy football league drafts. He caught 6 passes for 66 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. Once they switched quarterbacks from Andy Dalton, he started throwing the ball more downfield. Xavier Leggett's a guy you need to go get, pick up, put on your roster, and start playing. We talked about Xavier Leggett on our NFL Draft Preview show, where we highlight all the rookies coming into the NFL. He was one of them. He's going to impact fantasy football. We're going to put up a description in the link. Who else do we like? How about this hot topic? Dontavian Wicks of the Green Bay Packers. He's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. Last week with the injury to Christian Watson, who hurt his ankle, Dontavian Wicks was 5 of 78 with 2 touchdowns on 13 targets. This is the guy you got to go out and get. With Christian Watson out, he's going to pick up the slack like he did kind of last year. Go get him, put him on your roster, and get him in your lineup. Who else do we like? How about another guy we talked about last week? Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. He's only owned in 15% of leagues. He's a wide receiver. He caught 8 passes for 62 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. Once the quarterback, Anthony Richardson, went down, they put in the veteran Joe Flacco. We'll talk more about him later. And guess what? He started throwing the ball downfield to people like Josh Downs. Go get him, put him on your roster. We've been talking about him for weeks. We highlighted him in his rookie year in our NFL Draft Preview show. You can always watch those on YouTube or Facebook, Fantasy Football Redemption Rehab. Who else do we like at wide receiver? How about this guy? Trey Tucker, we talked about him last week. He plays for the Las Vegas Raiders. He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. Last week, he caught 5 passes for 41 yards on 6 targets, and he had a rushing touchdown on 3 yards. Who else do we like? We talked about this guy the last couple of weeks, too. Wayne Dell Robinson of the New York Giants, number 17. I'll tell you what, he's only owned in 30% of fantasy football leagues. He had 11 catches for 71 yards on 14 targets. You got to start watching the show. Hit the subscribe button because we talked about these guys for weeks. They've been hot waiver wire pickups in week 5, but you could have got them cheap, man. A couple weeks ago, you could have got these guys for nothing. Now it's going to cost you money. Got some other guys we need to talk about. How about these guys you need to keep on your radar? How about Jordan Willington from the Los Angeles Rams? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. With the injuries to Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, Jordan Willington's been getting the ball. Last week he got 6 receptions for 62 yards on 8 targets. And how about his running mate in the same team for the Los Angeles Rams, Tutu Atwell? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. He caught 4 passes for 82 yards on 6 targets. You know, these guys may be able to fill in. Bye weeks are coming up starting next week, so you better start paying attention to who you can get to put on your roster to fill those holes. Who else do we like? Here's some running backs we really like. We've been talking about this guy, Bucky Irving, for weeks now. Last week against the Philadelphia Eagles, he's the handcuff to Rachaad White, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He had 10 carries for 49 yards and a touchdown with 1 reception for 6 yards on 2 targets. He's probably not available in many fantasy football leagues. We've been talking about him for weeks. We did an NFL preview show on him also because he's a rookie. If you get a chance, you got to check those shows out. We'll put a link up in the description at the top of the screen on YouTube. Another guy we talked about last week you could have had, got you 10 points. How about Roschon Johnson for the Chicago Bears? He's a running back. He only owned in 20% of fantasy football leagues. He had 7 carries for 26 yards and a touchdown. He's the handcuff to DeAndre Swift, who's the running back you want to own. DeAndre Swift had a big game last week against the Rams. Another guy we talked about for a couple weeks now that was hurt. How about Tank Bigsby, number 4 from the Jacksonville Jaguars? He's the handcuff to Travis Etienne. He's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. He had 7 carries for 90 yards last week. I tell you what, these are guys you need to know about. They're handcuffs. You can pick them up, especially if you have the starter. Some guys you need to know about because IR, people who started the season on IR are coming off. How about Nick Chubb for the Cleveland Browns? Maybe someone cut him because they had to. I'd be going to pick him up. Here's some other guys you need to know about. How about Clyde Edwards-Helaire down there in Kansas City? He's a running back. They're losing people left and right. Looks like Rashid Rice is out for a while. They're going to bring back Clyde Edwards-Helaire this week or next. And how about Audrey Estime for the Denver Broncos? He's coming back in a couple weeks. He's on IR. And how about Jonathan Brooks, the rookie we talked about in our NFL draft preview show this year and said if you needed a good running back, this is a guy. But of course, he's got a knee injury and he might not be ready for prime time anytime soon. Let's take a look at some guys we talked about in the last couple of weeks that you need to have on your radar or on your bench. Kareem Hunt for the Kansas City Chiefs. He's owned in 30% of fantasy football leagues. Alexander Madison of the Las Vegas Raiders is owned in 35% of fantasy leagues. We've been talking about Ty Chandler of the Minnesota Vikings, still only owned in 40% of fantasy football leagues. Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills is owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. And a couple guys that you need to have on your radar, you might want to stash on your bench. How about Dameon Pierce of the Texans or Dalvin Cook of the Dallas Cowboys? These are guys you could put on your bench when they get a chance to play, which should happen soon. I tell you what, you already have them on there, and it won't cost you much money. Who else do we like? How about these tight ends? We talked about this guy last week, and for weeks we said, go out and get him. Did you? You could have got him cheap. How about Tucker Kraft of the Green Bay Packers? He's only owned in 5% of fantasy football leagues. Number 85 for the Packers had 6 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. Should have got him last week if you had the opportunity. It's going to cost you some bucks this week. Or how about number 88 for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Cade Otton? We talked about him the last week. He's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. He went out and got you 6 catches for 52 yards on 9 targets. Hit that subscribe button right now. You won't have to pay up for these guys. These guys are going to cost you some money. We've been talking about them for weeks. Who else do we like at tight end? Well, how about this guy, Tyson Hill of the New Orleans Saints? He's owned in 35% of fantasy football leagues. He's actually a tight end, but he had 6 rushes for 24 yards with 2 touchdowns. He plays tight end, he plays running back, he plays quarterback, but he got hurt last week. He's got an abdomen injury. He's missed some time with that earlier this year. Looks like he's going to miss some time again, so be careful with that guy. If you could have room on your bench, stash him till he gets healthy. Who else do we like? How about these guys at quarterback? Last week we told you about Baker Mayfield. We've been talking about this guy for weeks. Baker Mayfield's owned in just about every league now at Tampa Bay. He was 30 of 47 for 334 yards and 2 touchdowns with a quarterback rate of 100. Another guy we've been talking about for weeks, he's probably not on your waiver wire anymore, was Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. He had 7 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. We've been talking to him since week 2 of the NFL season. He was 20 of 28 for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had a quarterback rating of 123. Last week we told you about Andy Dalton for the Carolina Panthers. He went out and had 25 of 40, 220 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's only owned in 10% of fantasy football leagues. And a guy, if you need a quarterback because of the injury to Anthony Richardson, who hurt his hip again, go out and get yourself some Joe Flacco from the Indianapolis Colts. He's not owned in any fantasy football leagues practically. Last week he came in after Richardson got hurt and had 12 completions on 26 attempts for 168 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a quarterback rate of 105. Other guys, I'll tell you what, a hot pickup. If you can get this guy, we mentioned him in week 2 of the waiver wire report, was Justin Fields of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had a great game against the Indianapolis Colts. He was 22 of 34 for 312 yards and a touchdown with a quarterback rate of 104. But guess what? He runs the ball. He had 10 rushes for 55 yards and 2 more touchdowns. Look, you need to get Justin Fields on your roster if he's available and get him in your lineup. Hey, if you need yourself a defense, this week we like the Denver Broncos. They play the Las Vegas Raiders in Denver. It's going to be a tough game for the Raiders coming off that victory against the Browns. And if you need a kicker, how about the kicker for Atlanta, man? Young Ho Koo, man. This guy was 4 for 4. He kicked a game-winning like 57, 58-yard field goal. Go out and get yourself that guy, man. He's a solid kicker. Well, I tell you what, man, that's it for the weekly waiver wire report for heading into week 5 of the NFL season. If you get a chance, hit that subscribe button. I'm Buster Brown. The show is called Redemption Rehab. Good luck.